Welcome to the Gottesdienst crowd, where we foster confessional integrity, liturgical preservation, and preaching that doesn't stink. We believe that the historic liturgy of the divine service is more than mere cobwebs of antiquity, but it is a true treasure of the Church, to be dusted off and brought down from her attic to be enjoyed. So let's get dusting. Welcome back to the Gottesdienst crowd. This is Jason Broughton, your host. Today we have back with us Larry Beane. He is the pastor of Salem Lutheran Church in Gretna, Louisiana. He's also a departmental editor for Gottesdienst, the Journal of Lutheran Liturgy. He's the editor for sermons, so please do send your sermons in. If you don't think it's good enough, don't worry, we'll let you know. So whether we put it in or not. Anyway, welcome back, Larry.
Thank you, Jason. It's always a great pleasure.
So before we get into the topic, here's my standard plea for money. We do all this for free, and yet there is an expense on our end. So we're just asking you guys to pitch in a little bit to keep these things rolling out. If you would go to patreon.com/Gottesdienst. For just as little as $1 a month, you can help make sure that we have all the equipment and all the necessary subscriptions to ensure that these podcasts continue. All right. So, Larry, you have a recent blog post. Jesus albus non est, right? Jesus ain't white.
Yeah.
And in it, and I think this is descriptive of this entire year, really. You say that Idiocracy, that movie, that great cult fiction, right, classic, Idiocracy is no longer comedy, but now Idiocracy is documentary. And then you go on to say Idiocracy is nostalgia. Like, we're looking back on Idiocracy as though this is something to be attained, as opposed to what we have now. And nowhere else is this seen in kind of the political left and the lengths that it has gone to silence anything that goes against what it prizes the most. We see this in race relations. We see this in the measures, draconian measures of combating COVID-19, you name it. This year has seen kind of the stupidity level just skyrocket in terms of how we're dealing with interpersonal relationships. And how do we even unpack this, right? How do we begin to unpack this for our members? And as just Christians living in this world, engaging in the public square, what kind of framework do we have to naming, perhaps not naming, but at least identifying what's being done with race, with all of the politics, the name calling, the race baiting, all of those things? What kind of framework do we have biblically for this, and how should we respond? Should we even respond, or should we just let it go?
Wow, we're gonna need a few more hours to run all those leads down. But I think about when I started seminary in year 2000, and we were at that time just starting to talk about this phenomenon called postmodernism, and we had no idea kind of where it was going to go, but our professors were convinced that this is going to change the way we relate to the world, because obviously the Christian faith is based in the Word. And the fact that words are being bereft of their definitions and logical meanings, even the logical process itself is being called into question by postmodernism, that this was going to have a huge effect on us. And I don't think we saw how quickly everything would deteriorate, and how much of a challenge it would be just to have normal social discussions with people. Because that is the Christian faith it is the Word, and we talk about Jesus. We talk the gospel is communicated by, of course, by preaching, by teaching, by human relationships. And
Hmm.
everything now is poisoned by this inability to communicate. What we say, we mean. Other people hear what they want to hear, or the message gets distorted. They respond in kind, and then we respond in kind, and therefore we can't talk about Jesus. We can't talk about anything. We can't talk about politics. We can't talk about normal human things. We can't make the kinds of jokes we used to make, even though they weren't meant with malice. I mean, even long-standing books are now being canceled. Entire authors are being canceled. Shakespeare is being removed from schools. Classical literature, of course, Homer is gone. History classes are being completely rewritten. We can see where this is going. I mean, today they're canceling Dr. Seuss. There's a lot more objectionable, unwoke, politically incorrect stuff in the Bible than in Dr. Seuss. And how long is it going to be
Hmm.
before
Well,
publishers won't
so
carry it? You know what I mean? This is a challenge that we're looking at as a
yeah,
church.
so yeah, I guess. I mean, I think you're right. Just the very foundation of what it means to be human is being assaulted, right?
Sure.
Our very ability to converse. I mean, our ability to converse is based on, I mean, the two things that you can say in logic, right? The two things that you can do is either affirm something or deny something. And at this point, you're only allowed to affirm one thing in the world unless um, unless you want to be ostracized and separated and put into your own into some sort of like re-education camp almost. We can't. How can iron sharpen iron if you don't have the ability to disagree? How can we grow and learn and flourish if we don't have the ability to bounce ideas or be sarcastic about something or 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 point out that the emperor has no clothes or point out the fact that I mean it seems as though our entire system of government is based upon even the parliamentary system is based upon having some format for discussing dissent.
Right. Right.
How does this even happen if we don't do that?
Well, and in totalitarian societies, there is no dissent. You follow the party line, whether it was the USSR or whether it was Oceania in 1984. You simply
The
conform.
party.
Yeah, you conform. You adopt the newspeak. You adopt the language of your oppressors, whether it's cultural, whether it's corporate, whether it's government. There are people who have power over you, and you better not step out of line. And that's really what cancel culture is all about. You have to hold acceptable opinions, acceptable historiographies. You have to tell acceptable jokes. You have to portray things in movies that are acceptable. And it's a moving target. So, and it's also different rules applied based upon your intersectionality. So if a white person plays a black
Mm.
person in a movie, even if it's just doing a voiceover, like in a cartoon, that is horrible. That's racism. There must be mea culpas. There has to be people fired and lots of apologies. But it goes the other way around. The Queen of England can be portrayed by a black person, and that's considered progress, and that's considered somehow it's self-justifying. So there's different rules for different people. The rules change from year to year. Last year, just a few years ago, President Obama was praising Dr. Seuss, and now Dr. Seuss is racist, and President Biden refused to mention him on his own birthday, which is what that reading event that they do every year. It's held on Dr. Seuss's birthday to encourage children to read. So they still have the event, but they've canceled Dr. Seuss out of the Dr. Seuss birthday celebration because he's racist. And if our listeners have not read 1984, they must read it. I mean, that's like that's understanding wokeness 101. That's your basic first book. That's your primer. Read it. If you haven't read 1984, you must read it, and you'll see this sort of motivation for manipulation of language. It's really the manipulation of thoughts, and the manipulation of so that
Hmm.
those in power can have can always keep people off balance and keep people from thinking for themselves. That's what they fear more than anything, is people thinking for themselves, because they're inevitably, if we're all allowed to think whatever we want, there's going to be dissenters. There's going to be differences of opinion. There's going to be honest differences of opinion, and there's going to be iron sharpening iron. But if you're in power, you don't want any kind of revolt from the slaves. And that's what this is all about. It's ironic that they focus in on this slavery issue and use that as a cudgel to control everybody, when in fact the whole point is to turn us all into slaves, in a prison that's not built with walls, but it's built with the mind. And so that's really the danger I see here. It's kind of it's a soft totalitarianism, although at times government gets involved in enforcing this wokeness type stuff, and
Hmm.
and it becomes more than just a soft totalitarianism. But politics is indeed downstream from culture. So if our culture is becoming oppressive and totalitarian and not tolerating dissent, you can imagine what the state is going to be like 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road.
Hmm. So, so how does the average, faithful Christian respond in a culture like that? And what does the church corporate then? What role does the church corporate play in responding to it? So maybe we'd start with church corporate, and then move into then individual Christians. How do we counteract that? What role do we have to play? I mean, obviously, for the individual, it's determined kind of like by what their conscience can bear, just as you know, as anyone entering the military service, right? If your conscience can't bear taking another life, even if it's for a good cause, then you shouldn't be in the military, right?
Hmm.
Um, so, kind of, what is the spectrum of responses depending on what your conscience can bear in fighting, not fighting back, we can't even use that anymore, right? In taking a stand, to stand firm, to against those who would try to wrest away our, not only our political freedom, but even our freedom in Christ, and take away from us the ability to worship our God in the way that we that we should be able to.
Well, I think the first step is we need to look to our fathers in the faith and determine that um, we are not going to commit blasphemy, like Saint Polycarp, when he was um, threatened with being burned at the stake. He was 86 years old. He's a Christian bishop, and he was told to just to give allegiance to Caesar, which of course meant recognizing Caesar as God. And St. Polycarp's response to that was very gentle, but it was very firm. And he said, "Hey, for 86 years, my King and Savior has been good to me. I mean, how can I blaspheme him?" And that was it. I mean, and he was burned at the stake. So there is, as as the church, I think we have to be prepared for possible martyrdom, whether it's literal martyrdom like St. Polycarp suffered, or maybe it could be more. It could be kind of a totalitarian, stifling society like you had in communist Russia, or you currently have in China and in Cuba and other totalitarian societies, or it may be of a softer sort, like a cultural thing. You may have to be prepared to lose your job, to be thrown out of school, to be canceled, from this cancel culture. So and I think we have to be innocent as doves and wise as serpents. But the bottom line is we have to be committed to Christ, that there is a line that we won't cross, even if it means we lose our job, even if it means, they threaten us with jail. It's the mighty fortress, the verse about take they our life, goods, fame, child, and wife. We have to be prepared
Mhm.
that we could lose everything for the sake of Christ. And hopefully we won't. And, probably we won't. I don't know. I mean, I'm going to be a little optimistic here and say I don't think that next year President Biden is going to send troops into our churches and force us to do gay marriages, or they're going to machine gun us. I mean, I don't think we're at any point near that. But we do have to understand that there's going to be tremendous pressure on us to change our doctrine. We may be looking at losing our tax exempt status. That's something that, as destructive as that would be, I think that would really hurt a lot of our churches that are on the margins. A lot of us, we have property. And if they start taxing our property, I mean, we wouldn't be able to pay the clergy. We would maybe not even be able to pay the taxes in many cases, and we could lose our
Mhm.
property. We could lose a lot. And however, if we're just determined that even if they take our buildings, we're still going to meet in homes. Even if they take away all our vestments, we're still going to gather around the table and have the Lord's Supper. Um, Even if they tell us that we're horrible people, we're still going to reach out and evangelize and bring people the gospel, even if it costs us, even
Mhm.
though the cost is very dear. I think if we establish that commitment in our minds, and our leaders in the church should really focus us in that direction as well, I think, too. Not in a sense of fear mongering or panic, but just understanding what it means to be a Christian. I mean, we've been so coddled for so long, we've had it
Yeah.
easy. But there, all around the world, it costs something to be a Christian. If you're a Christian in a
Yeah.
Muslim country, it's very costly, and at any moment you could be executed. And if we I think we have to come to grips with that. We've had it soft for a long time, and raising children in that is very difficult as well. We have to train our children that there are things more important than life itself. There are things the most important thing isn't that you go to college and get a scholarship and do this. I mean, okay, if you can do that, that's great. But you know what? If being a Christian costs you a scholarship, then so be it. Then that's the price we will pay. I think that kind of internal
Yeah.
discipleship, discipline, the idea that following Christ is to take up the cross. I think that's really the first step in dealing with all
Mhm.
of these cultural landmines.
Yeah. And I think you're right. But I think what we're having a difficult time navigating because, as you said, we've had it so easy. Is what are the lines that we will not cross, right? So if you're the average Christian in the workplace, um, is it okay to go through the training but say this is bunk? Is it all of the woke training that goes on now? The Can you remain in good conscience a public school teacher? Can you? I mean, I think these are the real questions that real Christians end up having. Are okay. Yeah. So in the abstract, I get that, right? Obviously, we can't bow down the knee to Baal, but what is Baal in our instances, right? How can we begin to define and see, are they asking me to offer up incense to Caesar, or or is this something that I can abide as um, an innocent dove but as wise as a serpent? Does that question make sense?
Sure, that's the question, I think, in terms of our vocation as Christians in these difficult times. I don't think there's a one size fits all, and I don't think that there's an easy answer. I do think that as we are confronted with things, um, yes, I think we can sit through, these horrible diversity trainings, for example. I saw one. There's one. It's gone viral. It's been around for a few years. Where the diversity trainer, I think everybody in her audience was a group of middle-aged women, white women, and the diversity trainer was a black lady, and she told them all, "You are all racists." Okay, we've heard that before. It's systemic, right? You're all racist. But she went even further. She said, "White people are not human." She said white people are actually demons and brown people are human, and you can't help it. And no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, you're always going to be racist. And these nice little white ladies in the audience were kind of nodding pensively and taking it all in. And either they're really dumb or they're putting on a good poker face. Now, if that's what you have to do, if they, every what I find a lot of times in these corporations and everybody knows it's BS, and everybody just sort of goes through it because you got to do it. It's a box you got to check. Usually maybe federal money's involved or whatever. So everybody plays the role, and probably the diversity trainer herself knows it's nonsense too, but she's making money. Everybody's making money. So I think if they ask you in one of these diversity classes to lie, or, to say that, to condemn the white person next to you because he or she is white and therefore you're evil. I think if you're asked to do something that would violate your conscience, I think you'd have to really think long and hard about that. But sitting silently and
Yeah.
just listening to what they have to say, I think that's, sometimes you just have to listen to stuff like college student or high school students that have to listen to the teacher talk about evolution or gender theory or whatever. Look, that's their opinion, and you have to listen to that as part of the curriculum. If it might be that your parents can't afford to homeschool you or can't afford a private school, and the law literally says you have to be in this classroom, and that's a terrible thing, but you have to put up with it. But I think if they've, Jordan Peterson had it right. He said, look, if people want to identify as some third gender or what have you, they have the right to do that. And they want me to call someone by a name that, seems a little odd. Okay, that's fine. But what you can't make me do is say a he is a she. You can't make me use a pronoun that I don't approve of, or make me use a made up pronoun. And he drew the line there. And I was kind of surprised he got away with it in Canada. But he did, and he's still a professor at the University of Toronto, and he became well known because he was willing to be honest. I think we do have to be honest. I don't think we have to go out of our way to be obnoxious. I mean, I don't think you have to go to the diversity training and then raise your hand every 5 minutes and talk.
You don't have to pick fights.
Exactly. We don't have to go looking for a cross. The cross will come to us. Obviously, look, if you have to have a job to feed your children, there's certain things you got to just sort of suck up and deal with. But I think that, again, where are the lines? We can't commit blasphemy against our Lord. I don't think we can lie. I don't think that, if we are put in a position where we have to sin, like if a pastor were required to conduct a same-sex marriage, I wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't do it, and we shouldn't do it. Now,
well, I mean, so what do you mean by lie?
For a judge, it's a different story. A judge has to, by law, do this. Now, that judge may say, "Look, in good conscience, I can't do same-sex marriages. I may need to resign my appointment and seek employment elsewhere." That may well be the case. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No. I was interrupting you, actually. So you say lie, but I mean, there is a certain aspect, right?
Sorry, I interrupted you now.
Cancel your own subscription.
That's right. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So you're saying we can't lie, but obviously there are times when we should, right? Like, so when Corey ten Boom is hiding the Jews from the Nazis, God does not want you to hand them over to the Nazis.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
I mean, there is a time to resist and even do what seems strange, because what the governing officials or whoever is operating outside of their call and their sphere in this particular case. And so you resist them. And if that requires you to lie, I think that is okay. Right. So just talk a little bit more about that. So we have the extreme cases.
I see
what do you mean?
Yeah. I see what you're saying. Sure. I mean, you're not required to notify the Gestapo that your next door neighbor's hiding Anne Frank in the closet, I've actually had Lutherans make that argument, though, because it's in the Small Catechism.
I know.
So no, I get what you're saying, but what I'm getting at is like in the case where we're talking about the diversity trainer that tells you you're a bunch of white demons. Okay, I can say nothing, but if the diversity trainer asks me point blank, are you a demon? I mean, how can I say yes, I'm a demon without doing damage to my faith? Because no, I'm a human being. I'm created in God's image. I'm not a demon. Um, that's kind of what I'm getting at.
Exactly.
Now, you could look at it as sort of a game, and if everybody thinks it's kind of a game, well, yeah, of course I'm a demon. I guess you could say, well, I just mean it in a figurative way or whatever. But I I think there are lines that people need to be willing to stand up, and part of the perpetuation of this nonsense is if 99% of the people think this is nonsense, but nobody will stand up and say the emperor is naked, it assures our continued enslavement. But you could imagine, like, if a company, like, what would happen if, a big company had some kind of diversity training like this that was really bad. I mean, not all sensitivity training, obviously, goes that far, but I think a lot of them do nowadays. But let's say, a company had 100 employees, and all 100 of them said, "We're not doing it. We're not going, and we'll quit if you make us." An employer that has 100 employees and he's trying to make widgets or whatever, that would be a very powerful thing to fight back. It's almost like the labor union idea of collective bargaining. But usually what happens, it's a divide and conquer. People will say, "Oh, I'd rather you quit. You can lose your job, and that'll mean more money for me," or what have you. It becomes kind of a cutthroat mentality. But I think, again, I think we have to look at, if we have to lie in such a way that denies something, a tenet of our faith, I think that is completely off limits. Other things, okay, that may be negotiable.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad that we just kind of, because there are some people who will hear what you just say, we shouldn't lie, and think, oh no. So now,
Right, I know. You're
I
right.
mean,
I know. You're right. I'm
I,
glad you made that
I just got to
clarification.
make sure that they kind of yeah, I just want to make sure that,
I was
I mean,
speaking to a
and not
specific
go against your
example.
conscience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, okay. So how do we not let the powers that be, whether they are the demonic powers that are active on Earth, the political powers, the business slash, economic powers, how do we not let them, you mentioned divide and conquer. How do we not let them keep us separate as humans, as individuals that are part of a larger group, right? How do we not let them pit us against each other? How do we not let them divide and conquer us? How do we remain a a, a people who can talk and who can listen?
Well, there's a couple different levels in your question. I mean, if we're talking about as the church, I think we really need to confess the creed together. There is great unity in our Christian confession. I remember, I wish I could find the article, but I remember there were a group of confessional Lutheran Christians in Sweden, and they were of the type that refused to ordain women, and they refused to recognize same-sex marriages. They were very confessional, Orthodox Christian people, and this particular congregation was surrounded by protesters. They were shouting profanity and hurling epithets at them. You could hear it inside the church during the service. And it was, as you can imagine, that's a
Mm.
very upsetting thing. You can imagine what that's like. Well, I read that one of the accounts of this particular service, they said the words of the creed never meant so much than before that time, because while the world was hurling their hatred at them, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. They recited the creedal statements, and each line, I wish I could find the article because it was beautiful. Each line in the creed was an eternal truth that they would stake their lives on. And they realized just how radical that each line in the creed is. They realize just how much hatred it stirs up just making our confession. We in our country, we just run through the creed. Yeah, okay. What do I do after the creed? I think we do the hymn, right? And do I stand up? What time is lunch? It's very easy for our minds to wander because we have had it so easy for so long. But you can imagine if you have people pounding on your door outside. And you're confessing the creed. Each line that you could get to confess in the creed is a blessing because you are able to confess the faith. So I think we as Christians need to hold on to our faith and not make compromises in matters of our faith. I just read recently there was the largest evangelical adoption agency in the United States has just changed its policy to allow same-sex couples to adopt. They even rewrote they had sort of a confession of faith. They even rewrote it and removed the part that marriage is one man and one woman. And they basically said, well, we realize that families are changing in this country and we have to do what's best for children, blah, blah, blah. So they totally capitulated on that point and justified it because, well, we're still able to adopt kids out. I think that's a terrible mistake. I think, they literally changed a line in their creed. It wasn't the Nicene Creed, but it was something else. I think we have to double down on what we believe, teach, and confess, and we have to encourage our brothers and sisters to do the same. There are certain lines that we just will not cross. Now, the question about how do we keep them from dividing and conquering us, if you're referring to out, beyond the church, that's very difficult because we don't have a common creed anymore.
Yeah.
When the national anthem is played, half of the people are kneeling and half of the people are standing with their hand over their heart. This has been so destructive to our society. This division that's been dealt to us. I don't know that there's an answer to that question. I think we find like-minded people. We find community. We find, we still, even in this day of idiocracy where logic and reason and words don't mean anything, I think we still use them anyway. And we find there are people out there who believe in logic, reason, and words and
Yeah.
meaning. And we can so-called red pill people. You see evidence of it all the time. We don't have a choice. We're going to have to confess what's true, and we're going to have to argue that there is an absolute truth in the face of cultural and political forces that deny that reality. It's simply something we can't capitulate to. We've got to confess that there is absolute truth and find people outside of Christendom who will join hands with us in that matter. And there are people like that.
So to piggyback onto that, then what does the pastor need to start talking about? What does the pastor need to start doing to exercise the muscles of the faithful so that they build up calluses in the best sense to be able to withstand what is coming at them, right? I mean, in terms of what they face in the world and how to stand firm and how not to leave their post, so on and so forth.
I do think as pastors we need to be more aggressive in dealing with events, current events, cultural events, things that are happening in the world. Our tendency is, we're going to do Bible study, so we're going to everybody open up your Bible to Ephesians chapter 2, and then this Greek word means this. Okay, that's fine. That's we still need to do that, but
it's safe.
Well, yeah, we have to be better at applying our theology to the world in which we live now. Okay, so Saint
Yes.
Polycarp lived in a particular time when confession of the faith meant martyrdom. It meant confessing against a political leader called a Caesar who said he was God. Okay, we live in a completely different political context. But I think a lot of times, I may write something on social media or in my blog that touches on something political, and inevitably I get someone kind of wringing their hands saying, well, we shouldn't talk about this. Let's just talk about Jesus. Well, we are here to proclaim Jesus in a culture that is hostile, and where people have been veritably brainwashed against understanding that there is such a thing as absolute truth. So I think we can look at the examples of St. Paul. St. Paul went into the belly of the beast, into Athens, where there's idols everywhere, and he proclaimed the gospel, and he taught, and he alluded to the Christian faith in a different way than he would, say, in a synagogue. I think we need to be a little bit more
Yeah.
gutsy about it, and including in sermons. Now, our kind of Gottesdienst idea of preaching sermons is, of course, we don't get up there and crack jokes, and we don't turn it into a political discourse. We preach Christ crucified. We preach the gospel. We preach in a way that is sacramental, and we need to still do that. But I do find there are times I know
You
that
know what
all.
I mean? I just want to interrupt you
Yeah,
for a second.
go ahead.
We don't turn it into a political discourse. I think you're right on that. If we kind of speak about that with regard to partisanship, right? That we don't make our sermons partisan, party line stuff. Rather, it's political in the sense that it deals with the fact that just as our forgiveness of sins, just as our God took up flesh and was incarnate, and continues to work among us through means, so also our enemy. He works through means. It's not just this ethereal spiritual thing. There are things within the world, physical structures, even systems, right, that are hell bent against the gospel and the confession of the truth with regard to who God is and who we are in relation to him. So it's not partisanship, but it can be political.
Well, what I'm kind of thrusting at here is more like, we our sermons we shouldn't be like telling. We shouldn't say, okay, on the latest episode of Seinfeld, this happened. That I'm dating myself because there is no latest episode of Seinfeld, but I don't know any modern television shows. So, people they preach according to pop culture. They make pop culture references, the latest Marvel movie or
Mm-hmm.
whatever the latest binge watch is, and they'll use references. I mean, a lot of guys, I'm appalled at how many pastors, preach Star Wars and Harry Potter sermons. Okay. You may or may not, people may or may not be familiar with those things, but in one sense, I like sermons that are timeless. That you can see a John Chrysostom sermon and you can read it, and it's still just as valid today as it was then. But usually we're reading excerpts. Okay, so I'm sure that there were times
Yeah.
when St. John would have, if there was something culturally happening, like if it all of a sudden became a fad to where people were, like in the ancient Roman Empire, they had, weird people did some weird things. Like if everybody was putting all their attention on their pets and not having children, because that was a problem at various times in the empire, then of course that's going to come out in the sermon. Um, and that might sound
Yeah.
weird to people living in a different age and a different time when that wasn't an issue. I think at times we want to preach in such a way that it's timeless, but I think God puts specific men in specific places in specific times in a specific congregation. And so if you have a congregation that's struggling with a particular issue, by all means, we need to preach law and gospel in that particular context. And so that's what I'm getting at. And when I say, I think we're sometimes afraid to maybe confront some of those things because we don't want to be preachers that will, that someone 10 years from now might read our sermon and say, what was this TV show? I never heard of this. So, but by the same token,
Yeah.
culturally speaking, like for instance, when like Coca-Cola just had this thing where they were kind of secretly training their employees to be less white, and then word got out, and then it became this, it went viral, and people were very angry about this. It is an attack on our anthropology as being created in the image of God. So I think of a pastor, if this is all the buzz that's being talked about, a pastor can drop that into a sermon and mention it. I don't think he should talk for 10 minutes about it. But I think we need, when we preach the
Sure.
law, we need to pull up examples sometimes. And especially in a cultural malaise like we're in right now, I think it's okay to call out, Coca-Cola and say, look, this is an example of an assault on the dignity of the human person. And it's not just them, it's other companies, it's other individuals, it's other agendas, it's universities. And I think that, it's okay to make your sermons tailored to a particular group of people, a particular time, a particular cultural thing that we're all going through. I mean, I was in seminary when 9/11 happened, and I remember, I think it was Dr. Wenthy. Was the preacher that day, and he basically said, I'm not going to preach the sermon
It
that I
was
wrote today.
Guard.
Or was Dr. Guard? Yeah, he was. I was in his class at the time when he announced to us what was going on, and so yeah, I should have remembered that. But the point being that there are times when we kind of do have to go off script. There's a particular way I like to exegete my texts and preach them, but if we're in the midst of a pandemic, or we're in the midst of a lockdown, or there's talk of war happening, or if people are afraid of losing their jobs because they got caught with a Dr. Seuss book, I think it's okay to address those fears and to address where those sins are, where the sins are happening, and let people know. A lot of people there's a lot of false guilt out there. I mean, children, school kids are bombarded with guilt. If you're a Christian and you don't believe in same-sex marriage, you're a bad person. Or it can be just ethnic. If you're white, you're evil. And I think we have to address this. This is an evil ideology to make people, to attack people because of their race or because of their confession of Christianity. Likewise, our people shouldn't be doing it to other people, but we need to reassure people that no, this is actually not true when you're being told that you're sinning just by virtue of whatever color you are. I think we need to, I do think we need to engage the culture in that sense in our sermons, in our Bible class, in things we write for newsletters and so forth. I think it's as you said, it's very safe just to avoid the topic altogether and say, well, let's look at some obscure event from church history. Meanwhile, the world is blowing up around us. It's like we're in St. Augustine's city of God. The Vandals are at the door of the empire, and St. Augustine is saying, "Hey, remember that debate I had with Pelagius? That was really awesome, wasn't it?" He took on the cultural reality of what was happening. I think we got to do the same.
Yeah, we can't be Chris Farley on Saturday Night Live. Do you remember that one time? That was awesome.
Exactly.
Well, I think this is really I think this is really helpful. I mean, and just in terms of the fact that we need to be, and I know this is a kind of a buzzword, but we need to be more intentional about what we're talking about in our sermons and in our Bible classes, right? That we actually take the incarnation seriously, that these things happen within a particular time and place too, right? That the gospel is applied to particular people, as you said, at a particular time and a particular congregation, which is at a particular place. And these people are going through particular things, right? And that doesn't mean that that the gospel has morphed, but it does mean that, perhaps the appearance or the coming to the surface of sin looks slightly different, even though the motivation for the sin is the same. And so the scripture never loses its timelessness, nor do our sermons, but it is applied to particular things in particular places.
Well, yeah, look, if I could jump in. We don't go in the pulpit and just read the Bible. We
Right.
we preach, we proclaim. There is some teaching that goes on in the pulpit. There is application of law and gospel. It's a lively. The word is lively, and God does call specific men to that office. We can't just put a text into a computer and have the computer write a sermon for us. There's a very real human connection, and that's the incarnational nature
Mhm.
of the preacher. And the more you know
Yeah.
your parishioners, you know what their fears are, you know what they're talking about, you know what they're looking at on social media, you know what they're what they're going through on their jobs. And as you get to know people, and I think it's another reason to stay in a parish a long time. People take years sometimes to open up to you, but after a while you get to know them like your own family. And then when you are in the pulpit,
Mhm.
you're not just an academic giving a lecture. You're like the dad bringing the family together and giving your children advice, like, "Hey, son, I know you're at work and you're getting this flack for all of this. Here's what I think you ought to do." Only we're doing this informed by the Holy Scriptures, and I think that that
Mhm.
kind of preaching is I think that's why God gave us preachers, because literally otherwise we could just play a tape recording of somebody reading Romans 10, rather than actually being the one who has been sent, actually delivering the word that saves people. The word has to be applied,
I
and
think
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I think that I would just have John 19:30 on the loop, It is finished. It is finished. It is finished. It'd be real quick. We could get in and out of there like that. Uh,
People get that coveted table at Denny's a lot quicker.
that's right. But no, I think you're right. I mean, we need to be not only we need to be more active in terms in our as pastors in our preaching to apply what's going on today, but I think we need also to be very specific about, look, this is what you need to do, right? These are the things you need to double down on, right? You need to
Sure.
double down on spending time with your family. You need to spend time reading the Bible, period. Right? If you're not reading the Bible, uh, with this kind of regimen, look, you need to up your game. If you're
Absolutely.
just doing portals of
Absolutely.
prayer, not that there's anything wrong with portals of prayer,
Sound like a
uh,
Seinfeld episode.
you need to. Not that clearly it was not a pick.
Not that
Not
there's
that there's
anything.
anything wrong with that. Yeah. I mean, seriously, not that portals of prayer is bad, but if that is the only thing that you're doing in these particular times, especially, you need to up your game, right?
Portals of prayer is the gateway drug. No,
Well,
we're
I
I know
guess
we're making
that
jokes
makes
about this, but look, the Bible is the Word of God, and it should be elevated to a position of high priority, as is attending the divine service. It's interesting because the pandemic, I've actually had people come back to church that I haven't seen in a long time. It made people, it brought people to think about serious things, life and death, and what is going to happen in the future for their children, and so you're right. This kind of be, elevating the Word of God to a much higher priority, upping your game, so to speak, as a Christian. This is very important, and this is an opportunity for us pastors to have those kinds of conversations. One of my predecessors, Pastor Schmidt, he really was Pastor Schmidt. He served my congregation from 1919 to 1967. Can you imagine the changes that man saw?
whoa.
47 years in the same parish. He never owned a car. And our community is very small. So he walked everywhere he went. And if you missed church, he showed up at your door on Monday. knocked on the door, and he was always seen sitting on porches. He didn't like to go inside. He was real. It's funny, how we were real careful about being one-on-one with a minor, or being around people of the opposite sex. We want to make sure we don't want to be accused of things. Pastor Schmidt wouldn't even ride in a car with a woman. He was very very careful about even giving the appearance of evil. But so consequently, people in our community saw him on the porch all the time. He was sitting on people's porches all the time. And I had a visitor about a year ago who grew up as a child in our parish. And he said, Pastor Schmidt would always talk about the things you're not supposed to talk about: religion, politics, and sex. And so that's what Pastor Schmidt was talking about with people on the porch. And, we sometimes maybe we're a little too polite with our parishioners, and it's like, oh, pastor's here, give him some
Yeah.
pie, and let's make sure the Bible is sitting out so he thinks we're reading it or whatever. And again, you have to get to know your
Make sure
parishioners.
to dust it off.
Right. Put that picture of Jesus on the wall. But, after you get to know your parishioners over many, many years, they confide in you with things. They'll tell you what's going on with their kids, their family, what they're afraid of. And it gives you the opportunity to, whether it's in the pulpit or whether it's in your private visits, to really address things like these cultural changes that are very frightening to people, and that are intimidating and threatening to even our ability to proclaim the gospel. And along those same lines, I think we need to talk to our brother pastors as well. We need to have solidarity with our clergy brothers, and really lock arms, and going into battle together. These are very serious times. This is a war. Has always been a war, but sometimes wars have periods where it really heats up. And I think we're quickly approaching that
Mm-hmm.
time culturally. So, it's funny how the left always says, we need to have a conversation. And when they say it, it means you shut up and we'll lecture at you. But I think we as Christians really do need to have conversations with one another, with us, pastor to pastor, pastor to parishioner, and Christian to Christian. I think us being, as you said, a more intentional community, I think is really, really important. I think Christians need to rely on each other and have each other's back in especially in trying and troublesome times like what we live in.
Mm-hmm. So one last question. We're obviously not worshiping in the catacombs yet. What should we do now so that we don't regret, once we get into the catacombs, that we failed to do previously? What are the things that you think that we might regret if we don't begin doing now?
Well, I think
if we end up in the catacombs,
I think what we just talked about, for one thing. I think it's really easy just to skirt all of this and just do business as usual. Just preach and teach and study the scriptures in a generic way and put our heads in the sand like ostriches, and then to justify it by saying, oh, well, I'm just focusing on Jesus. I'm not getting involved in all of that other stuff. I've heard people say that. I think it's cowardly, and I think that people who do that will live to regret it. There's a quote from Solzhenitsyn. I wish I had it at my fingertips, but he said that, when they were in the camps, oh, how we burned, he said, thinking of what we could have done before we were arrested. And now we regret it because we can't do anything about it. And so, obviously, violence is not the solution, and violence is not the answer to anything. That's not how we operate. We operate by means of the Word of God. I think we need to double down. I think we need to be more courageous. We need to draw strength from the Word and from our brothers and sisters in Christ. I think we're going to have to take some more risks. And I think we have to put trust in that the Lord will protect us. And like Daniel, that great passage from Daniel. What is it? I think it's 3:16 or 3:15 to 17 in that range, where the young men were being threatened with being thrown in the oven, and they said, our God will protect us. But even if not, we're still not going to bow
yes.
down to you, O King. but if not. I think it's in the King James Version. I think it's something like, but if not. It's a beautiful, defiant passage. I think we have to find that
Yeah.
inner defiance, along the lines of St. Polycarp. It's like, I am not going to burn the pinch to Caesar. I'm just not going to do it. You can kill me. You can take my church away from me, whatever. I am not going to do it. I'm not going to cross that line. So I think those are the kinds of things. And I think we should be more aggressive at teaching against isms that we find in our day, like cancel culture and critical theory, critical race theory. It's real easy to avoid race because it is such a divisive issue. You can be quoted out of context and find yourself being harmed, losing your job, losing your career, being thrown out of school, having your house vandalized. But we have to be careful the way we speak. We have to be honest. We have to be truthful. We have to be focused on the cross and not just run into our shell all the time. We just really have, and I know it's easier
Mm-hmm.
said than done, and I realize that. And in many ways, pastors have an easier go of it because I don't really have to worry about losing my job if I speak the truth. And I think that means pastors all the more need to have the guts to speak up, precisely because we have the freedom to say things in many cases that other people don't.
Yeah, I remember recently in Bible class saying to my people, I realize that it's very easy for me to say this in this very comfortable setting of Bible class. You, at least at this point, have to bear the brunt of whatever it is that we believe. But I want you to know I've got your back, and we're moving forward. We're gonna be bold, and come what may, whatever happens to you actually ends up happening to me in some way or the other.
Sure.
Right? If you lose your job, it happens to me too.
Well, that is true, and I think we have to understand that we're shepherds, but we are also part of the flock, and we have to set the example, and we have to, by using the Word of God, help bring courage and resilience to our parishioners. And these are difficult times, and everybody has to live through difficult times of some sort or another. Whether it was the medieval plagues and religious wars, and the Reformation, or other things. But this is our particular cross, and we have to embrace it and move the kingdom forward, even when. It's sort of like the fireman. The fireman runs into the building when everybody's running out. When your instinct is to flee the fire, the fireman actually runs in. A combat soldier actually goes into the fray rather than running away. And I think we need to develop that kind of attitude, or that kind of habitus, that kind of mentality. It's not business as usual anymore. We've seen great changes. And again, I think a lot of it is postmodernism. People are terribly confused because words don't mean what they once meant, and people are being accused of things that they didn't do. And the stakes are very high.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your thoughts, Larry. I know we started out, we were going to talk about your article, and then we just briefly discussed that one point and then got off onto this entire other discussion. But I think it's really quite helpful to have gone down this section. I think these are the things that we are all facing, that we kind of we just need help kind of figuring out how do we handle all of this. And I think what you've had to say today has helped us at least give us a framework by which we can understand what's going on, and then at the same time, then how do we respond to it as Christians, as pastors, as the church at large? So thank you for your time as always, and I look forward to having you on again.
Thank you, Jason. It's a great privilege, great joy.
All right, you take care.